In working with sequins, we must first look at the differences between an area and a line. Now on my screen I have two objects that look very similar. They're both satin stitching, they're both about the same width, but as we look at them in the outline view, I'll click on View Outline, we can see that they're actually quite different. I'll go ahead and zoom in on all these areas, and we can see the one on the left looks like a rectangle, whereas the one on the right looks like a line. Now the one on the left is what we define as an area. And if I right click on this area, you can see that it is a closed shape, and within that closed shape is where the stitches are defined, in that the stitches will fill inside this shape. A line, on the other hand, which is on the right hand side here, if I right click on that, you can see it's much skinnier, but also it is not a closed shape. Even though we could actually create, a rectangle, it wouldn't fill inside of a rectangle. A line, the way that a line is defined is that it is an open shape. It's not closed, and our stitches do not fill inside of the closed shape. If I right click on the area and go to my stitch properties, I'll just left click on the property settings, you can see here that it says Area Object Stitch Properties. Within the Area Object Stitch Properties, you have many different stitch types that you can choose from. Whereas on the right hand side, our line, if we go to the stitch properties, it brings up Line Object Stitch Properties. And with these stitch types that you can select are quite different than the stitch types that you can select from the area. So one big question is, why do these two objects look very similar? If we look at the satin, or if we look at our stitch view, the reason that they look very similar is that this shape is about 4.5 millimeters wide, and the stitches again fill inside that shape, and therefore it's considered an area. Whereas this line, if we right click on the line and select it, you can see that with the line, the width of the satin stitch is dispersed on each side of this line, meaning that we will set a width, and then half of that width will go on one side of the line and half of the width will go on the other side of the line. If we right click on this area on the on the left hand side, we can see that the stitches actually fill within that area. I'll go ahead and choose both, and we can see the big difference. See the blue and white flashing lines? You can see that our satin stitches go outside these lines, whereas the satin stitches on the left hand side follow within the line. So seeing that these two objects could be very similar in stitch types or stitch settings, they're actually very different. And what we had seen before is that an area object stitch properties are much different than the line object stitch properties. And that brings me to the point of the difference in digitizing areas and digitizing lines for sequins. When we digitize for sequins, sequins fits on a line. It does not actually fit inside of an area. If we right click on the orange bar, go to our stitch properties with a left click, and within our stitch properties, if we view through the stitch types and scroll through here, we can see that there are no properties for sequins stitching. Whereas if we right click on the object on the right hand side and go to our stitch properties, if we scroll through here, we can see that there is a setting for sequins stitches. We can actually digitize for sequins in different ways. We can do it on a line, or we can do sequins one at a time. For this first section, we'll actually talk about doing sequins on a line. So we're going to start a new design, and within a new design we are going to use the manual punch tool on the right hand side called Create Freehand Line. With Create Freehand Line, I'll left click to activate the tool, and on the left hand side it tells me what type of object I'm inputting. I am inputting a line. You can change the color, and there's also a pre-close function of on or off. And that pre-close function allows you to make a complete object, and meaning that it will connect back. The object will actually snake back into itself, kind of like a square or a circle, or it will not. The first one that I'm going to do, we're going to leave that pre-close function off. So I'm going to move into my design workspace, and my cursor turns into a crosshair. With that crosshair, I'm going to plot points. I can use left clicks for corner points, which I will use a left click, a left click, a left click, or I could use right clicks for smooth points. Anytime I make a point that I don't like and I want to go back one by one, I can hit the backspace key. So what we'll do here is we will make 3 points, left click, left click, left click, excuse me, we're going to make 4 points, and left click. I'll hit enter on the keyboard to input my points and to end my selection. Now the second item that I'm going to do, so we can see the difference, I'm going to put the pre-close as on. Now when I left click on that, and I'll make the same points, left click, you can see that it will make a run around the entire object, left click, and then enter. But it's not a closed shape in that your stitches don't fill inside the shape. And that, remember, that was a big difference between an area and a line. So I'm going to right click on this first item right here, and we will go to the stitch properties. I'll left click here. We'll scroll over and we'll choose running sequin. When choosing running sequin, our running sequin tab appears. I'm going to left click on running sequin, and here the first option is the sequin distance. Now this is going to measure from center point of sequin to center point of sequin, the distance between each center point of the sequins. Right now at 5 millimeters, if you have a 5 millimeter sequin, which is what is very common and what is actually sent with the machines, the sequins will be right next to each other. If you'd like to have space between the sequins, you would do a larger number than 5. If you want the sequins to overlap a little bit, you would do less than 5. So remember, the distance is from sequin center to sequin center. So what we'll do is we'll leave that as 5. We have several different lock styles that we can choose from. The simple lock style, which is the first one, will put a single stitch in the middle of each sequin to lock that sequin down. So it will go from sequin to sequin, putting a stitch in the middle of that sequin. And we can see that here on our screen. If I change that to single, I'll left click to change it to single. What happens is that our lock style changes. The lock style goes from just center of sequin to center of sequin to outside the sequin, inside the sequin, and then outside the sequin. So we now have 3 stitches. So it will do a stitch outside the sequin, then do a stitch in the middle of the sequin, and then do another stitch outside the sequin. And that will do for every sequin. The next one is a cross sequin, or a cross lock style. It will put a stitch here, a stitch on the outside, a stitch on the inside, a stitch on the outside, a stitch on the inside, a stitch on the outside, a stitch on the inside, and a stitch on the outside. And then it will move to the next sequin. So it's really locking down that sequin. The hung, as you can see, this is more for sequins that are going on a straight line. or more horizontal lines, I should say, as these are hanging sequins. So you can see what happens is that it will stitch outside the sequin, then inside the sequin, and then back outside the sequin, but from the top down. The next one is a triple. The triple is kind of like a Mercedes sign. And what that will do is it'll go outside the sequin, inside the sequin, outside the sequin, inside the sequin, outside the sequin, and then move on to the next one. So the triple and the cross are sequin stitch or sequin lock styles that go multiple times outside the sequin in different coordinates. The repeat, this is kind of like a triple run stitch or stitching that goes over on top of each other, where that it stitches outside the sequin, inside the sequin, outside the sequin, kind of doubles over itself. Goes back, inside the sequin, outside the sequin, and then back over on top. So this is a couple of stitches on top of each other, but very similar to single, but it repeats over itself. Now we also have some other features for angle and margin. The angle refers to, depending upon which lock style you're selected on, will change the way that the lock style, the angle of the lock style. And as you can see, that move on how you want that to lay across your sequin. Now again, it depends on which sequin stitch type you're choosing, so you can see that angle change. With the margin, that is how far outside the stitch will go along the sequin's edge. So for instance here, our stitching is going to go 0.5 millimeters from the edge. So it's not going to go right on top of that sequin. If I did have it at 0, it would be right on the edge of the sequin and actually maybe puncture through that sequin a little bit. So you can see as you go larger outside, it will do the stitch longer. So a 0.5 margin is the default, and that is a pretty good default for sequins stitching. The button down here, sequin shape, if we left click on that, we are defining the shape of the sequin to show on screen. Most sequins that we do get, most sequins that you do see are circle. You do have different styles of sequins that you can get, rectangle, triangle, or ellipse. We'll leave it as circle. You can change the color of the sequin. This is just really for viewing purposes, if we want to change the color. And then the radius of the sequins. 5 millimeter sequin, your radius is going to be 2.5. So we'll leave that radius as 2.5. Now for the feeding direction of your machine, we want to change that to north, because your sequin's foot is in front and it will be feeding the sequins from the north, and that it's feeding it to the machine or to the needle from the north side of the needle. So we'll press OK here, and we'll press OK here with these settings. And as we press OK, we can see that I'll right click off to the side, but our sequins are right next to each other. That was that sequin spacing, in that it's going from center point to center point, so those sequins are touching each other. We also have the triple lock stitch, and the margin of that lock stitch is going to be 0.5 millimeters, so it's going to go just outside that sequence. So let's take this object right here, this line. We'll right click, then go to the property settings, and we're going to scroll over and choose running sequin. We'll left click on the running sequin tab, and if we want that sequin, let's have those sequins be a little bit further apart from each other. Let's go ahead and type in 7. So from center point to center point, it's going to be 7 millimeters. We'll do a single lock stitch and we'll hit OK, and once we hit OK it'll automatically regenerate it. And as we can see, as we right click off to the side, you can see our lock stitch is quite different, and also that we have more spacing between our sequins. Now what we've shown here is doing sequins on a line, and a lot of people ask, well, if I can't do sequins inside of an area, how do I make a fill of sequins per se? And the way that we do that is we actually snake the line that the sequins will be on. We snake it back and forth so that it does, in a sense, create a fill. Now, since we do have 5 millimeter sequins, I'm actually going to change my view preferences. So to change our view preferences, we'll go to View, and then View Preferences. We'll then go to the canvas setting, and my spacing for my grid I'm going to change to 5 by 5. I'm also going to choose Snap to Grid, and that will allow me to snap my points to my grid lines. It will allow me to snap my punch points or my manual tools to my grid lines or my grid intersection points. So I'll press OK, and we can see that our grid now changes. And let's go ahead and just zoom in on an area just so I can see it a little bit better on screen. I will take the tool of Create Freehand Line, left click. I'll keep the pre-close off, and what we'll do is we'll start from the left hand side, make a left click, and you can see that it's snapping to my grid. I'll make another left click, and I'm going to go from line to line. Left click, and all I'm doing is making left clicks. And as you can see here, I'm kind of almost making like a Superman shape. And what I'll do is I'll end right here, press Enter on my keyboard, press Escape to get out of the tool, and while that is selected, I will then go to my Properties settings with a left click. I'll scroll over and choose the running sequin. Here with the running sequin, we'll go to the running sequin tab. We'll do a triple stitch. I'll leave the sequin distance at 5. We'll go ahead and hit OK, and when we hit OK, we can now see that this looks more like a fill area. And let's go ahead and zoom the whole design. And what we've done here is we have created the lines that snake back and forth, and that creates more of a filled area. So when we do want to do, shapes that are filled with sequins, we need to snake that line back and forth, or make sure that that line that we do manual punching with will adhere to the shape of what we want to fill with sequins. Now we can also digitize sequins one at a time, and that's where the Sequins Toolbar actually comes in. The Sequins Toolbar is right down at the bottom of my screen. I'm going to drag it up into my design workspace so we can see. In the Sequins Toolbar, this has the same settings as it does in our line object stitch properties, has the different stitch types or lock types. For now, I'm going to actually just put it on simple, and you can also change your sequin demo shape right within here, which is that same setting that we had before. So I'll just hit OK here, and we'll leave everything that way. And for inputting sequin by sequin, it is the same idea as inputting stitch by stitch. And that's with our icon over here on the right hand side called Insert Stitches. When we left click on Insert Stitches, that activates the tool and our cursor turns into a crosshair. Now there are no properties that come up with this tool because it's inserting stitch point by stitch point. In order to insert a sequence, we must first right click, and the reason is because we can insert different individual stitch points. We can do a normal stitch, which would be a lock stitch. We can do a jump, a trim, or a sequin. And we will left click to select sequin. So now it knows we want to punch sequin by sequin. So I will make a left click to input. That will be, just one sequin. I can, this is just left click. So as I make my left clicks, I'm just doing sequin by sequin wherever I left click. So now if I hit enter to end my inputting, you can see that I've input my sequin by sequin. Let's go ahead and change that lock style to triple. And again, you can change your margin or your angle within the Sequin toolbar. We'll go back to Insert Stitch, left click to activate Insert Stitch. Again, we do need to right click to select what kind of stitch type we want to put in there. We do want to input a sequin. So I will start making left clicks. And I'm just doing left clicks. And you can see I overlap some. And once I'm finished, I'll hit enter, and now you can see that it does my triple stitch. And you can see that some of these sequins, it's probably not optimal because we do have stitching on top of a sequin. Now on this area, since we do need to change the way the sequins are laying next to each other because of the overlapping of stitching on top of the sequins, we would actually go to our stitch editor, in the sense that we need to alter the individual stitch points. So while we're in stitch view, I am viewing my stitch penetrations with the stitch penetration on right now, and then also we need to activate edit mode, so we'll just left click on edit mode. When I do that, I can move my cursor inside the middle of the sequence. I'll left click to select that middle of the sequence stitch, and then to move that I will left click, hold, and drag on that red cross, and it will move that sequence. So to move this one, I'll just left click inside the middle sequence stitch, lock stitch, left click, hold, and drag, and move that. Now if I need to move the shape, or you need to move sequins on a line, I would actually change the shape of that line. This is stitch point by stitch point by using that insert stitch tool. I'll just go ahead and get off of the edit mode. But if I want to alter the shape, I go into the view outline like we would alter any shape, go into the edit mode, right click to select the area or line, and in this case it's a line, and change that line accordingly. After I change that line and hit go, you can now see that my sequence will change. So with doing sequins on a line, that brings up the question, what kind of lines can we input? And there are many ways to create lines or input lines. And what we'll do is we will go over the different ways to create lines. I'm going to go ahead and start a new design, and we will take that sequins bar and we'll bring it back down to the bottom here. On the right hand side, I do have manual punch tools. Within my manual punch tools, there are several tools that I can use to input lines. The first two are creating satin stitches, and this is very specific to creating satin stitching. This does not create lines, this creates satin stitch areas. The next one is create freehand line. To activate it, you just left click to activate, and you do get your properties on the left hand side. With your properties, it does tell you what type of stitching you are inputting. You're inputting a line. You can change the color just by left clicking on the color, and then you get a little box with 3 points. I'll left click on the 3 points. I'll go ahead and change my color, press OK, and then you do have that option of the pre-close off or on. Now before I showed you what that looks like. We'll leave that off for now. But as I place my cursor over on top of my design workspace, now remember that my snap to grid is on, so it is going to snap to my intersection points. I will left click, and when I make left clicks, it'll make corner points. If I make right clicks, it's going to make smooth points. To end inputting, you hit enter, and then to get out of the tool, you hit escape. We'll activate that tool again, so we'll click on Create Freehand Line again. We'll leave the color as blue, but this time we're going to change the pre-close to on. So what we'll do here is we'll make a series of left clicks, and as I left click, you can see what the preview would look like if I were to hit enter at any point. So I'll hit enter now, and it closes up that line in the sense that it's going to run around that line and go back to the beginning point. I'll press escape to get out of the tool and right click to deselect. The next tool is specific for create freehand area, and this one we would not use for a line. The next one is create continuous line, and with create continuous line, if I left click on this one, you can do the pre-close on or off, which is the same idea as what we did up here. You can also change the color, and what we'll do is we'll change the color here, left click on that, press OK. Now with this tool, it's not a series of left clicks and right clicks, it's actually drawing with your mouse. And in drawing with your mouse, you will left click on your mouse key, but hold that left click while you're drawing. So I'm actually going to try and write my name, and if I just left click, hold, and drag, what I'm doing is I'm creating a continuous line, and it's following my movements on the mouse itself. Once I'm finished, I'll let go of the left click. It will input those stitches right there. I'll press escape to get out of the tool and right click off to the side to deselect. You can do that with the pre-close on or off. Now the next three tools, the create rectangle, create circle, or create true ellipse, they act very much the same in that you can choose between or a line or an area. I'll left click on create rectangle, and here you can choose area or line. So for sequins you would want to do a line. Again, you can change the color. Now when I put my cursor inside the area, I will left click, hold, and drag, and again, I am on the snap to grid, so that's why it is snapping to my grid. If I left click in one corner and drag, left click, hold, and drag towards the other corner, that helps me make my square. If I hold Control key on the keyboard while I am dragging, I can then make a rectangle. I'll let go of my left click to end inputting. I'll press escape to get out of the tool. The circle is the same idea. I'll left click to activate. I can change that from area to line just by using the drop down arrow. Left click to select. If I left click, hold, and drag from one corner to another corner, or to the opposite corner, I will create the circle. If I hold the Control key, I can then create an ellipse. So if I let go of my Control key, you can see it snap back to a circle. If I hold the Control key down, it will do an oval or an ellipse. I'll just do a circle. I'll let go of my left click. It will input that circle, and then I can hit escape. The next one is the create true ellipse. If I left click on that, this is a little bit different in that it's the same in that we'll create a line, but we're actually measuring from the center out. So I'm going to left click once to activate the tool, or to start the tool, and as I go from the center out, you can see that radius. What I'll do is I'll make a single left click, And then after I do that, I can move my cursor around if I'd like to make an oval in an opposite direction. If I do want to make the circle, in that same position I would make another left click, but let's make the oval, so I will left click again. And that will end the inputting. I'll press escape to get out of the tool. Right click off to the side to deselect. Now we also have the tool of create a true arc. If we left click on that, this inputs as a line. It does not input as an area, so we can use this as a line. There are a couple different ways that we can input a true arc. The first way that I'm going to show you is with left clicks. I'll place a left click for my endpoint. As I move my cursor up, I'll place another left click for the center of the arc and make a left click. And then I will move my cursor over and make another left click for the endpoint. So each left click, which will be 3 total, will be center point, will be first point, center point, end point. Now, if we continue, since this is in a sense the end point of the first segment, but the first point of the second segment, we'll make another left click, and that will be the center point, or the arcing point, and then left click again for the end point, and then that will also act as the beginning of the next segment or arc segment that we do. Left click and left click, left click and left click, left click and left click. I'll hit enter on my keyboard and that will end inputting. Now I'm still on the tool. I haven't yet hit escape. The other way that we can input a true arc is with the first point and last point and then arc it. So to do that, I will left click for my first endpoint, move my cursor over where I want my second endpoint, and right click. When I do that, that tells the computer to do the second endpoint. Then I will arc my arc and left click. And then we go to the next segment. If we'd like to do the endpoint first rather than the center point, we then do a right click, arc it, and then left click. And then we would do a right click and a left click. A right click, left click, right click, left click. Enter to end inputting and escape to get out of the tool. Now we also have the punch tools on the right hand side of our screen that will allow us to do lines on each one. With the punch tools, which are the green shapes, each one of these tools have the option to do a line if it's not already a line in itself. The rounded corner rectangle, you can do a line or an area. The punch ring, you can do a line or an area. The punch spiral is a line only. The polygon star is a line or an area. Polygon star line is a line only. Sector arc is area or line. Moon, area or line. Cross, area or line. Cross arrow, and the rest of these are all areas or lines. They all act a little bit differently in the way that they are punched in. I'll just scroll over and we'll choose a heart. We'll left click on the heart. Right now it is an area, so we do want to change it to a line. We'll leave the color as is, and as we use this, it's very much like the square and the circle in that we will left click, hold, and drag, and we will drag from one corner to the opposite corner. If we do hold the control key, we will get an oblong heart, or different style hearts depending upon how you drag your mouse. But I'll just let go of the control key so we get the proportionate heart. Let go of my left click. Now with these tools, they're a little bit different in the sense that they have control points that you can change before you input your object. So as I place my cursor over these control points, or these blue nodes, my cursor turns into an extended crosshair. Each node does something different along the actual shape. If I place my cursor over one of the nodes, it'll turn into the extended crosshair. I will left click, hold, and drag, and then I can change that position or that control point. And I can change the way, depending upon each tool, I can change different control points. I will hit enter to end the inputting, and then I will hit escape. So with all these tools, in using lines, I can use these all with sequence stitching. Because of the way that cording works, we can see that the stitching goes down in the middle of the cord and follows basically a running stitch. Now what we must make sure of is that the running stitch travels from one end to another end without backtracking over itself, because the cording will follow the machine, or will follow the stitching, and that design is based off of that stitching. So in saying that, with cording, we need to follow a running stitch, and that needs to be a single running stitch. The double or triple running stitch will backtrack over itself, which can actually mess up the design a bit or mess up the cord. So we just want a single running stitch running from one end to another. Again, running stitches will follow on lines, so we must digitize a line. And what I'll do is I will left click on create freehand line, and we will make some left clicks, and I'll make a right click. Oh, let me press escape here. I want that pre-close off. I just want it, I don't want it to make a complete shape. I'm going to draw my own shape. So we'll go to create freehand line again. We'll turn off the pre-close, and what we'll do here is make a left click, make a right click, make a left click, make a right click. Oops, I'll hit backspace because that wasn't the click I wanted to make. Right click, and then a left click. I'll press enter on my keyboard, press escape to get out of the tool. Now while we are on this area right here, I want you to notice the in and out points. That's where the stitching will start and the stitching will end. Now that is proper in the sense that we want it to go from one end to another without backtracking over itself, but we must make sure that the stitch type is a single run stitch type. The program does default to a double run, and I can see that down here at the bottom of my quick toolbar it says double run. We'll go to the stitch properties while it is selected, left click to select. I'll change that to a run, press OK. Once I press OK, it changes that to a running stitch, and now I will check that in my stitch player. I'll left click to activate the stitch player, and we will go stitch by stitch with the play button. And as I play the stitching, we can see that it goes from one end to another without backtracking over itself, and that ends right there. We'll get out of the stitch player with a left click, and now this is good for cording because it is going to just go from one end to another. Now with creating shapes for cording, we do want to do the same thing in that we do want to digitize on a line. I will choose the create freehand line, and we will start on one end, and I'm just going to make some right clicks, and as I come back through here you can see that I'm crossing over, and I'm just making some right clicks in designing this. Now I'm not following any pattern, but we can always input a pattern if we'd like. to create a design. But you can see I'm just creating a design with right clicks. I'm not doing anything special. And I will end that pattern. Now we do have the in and out points. And remember, they need to be on opposite ends. Press escape to get out of the tool. And we're going to change the stitch type from double to a regular run. Once we do that, we'll check the way that the stitching is going to follow in the stitch player. We'll go ahead and play the stitches. It does the first one. And we can see that it just follows in one direction, not doubling over itself. That's the most important thing with doing cording, and that we don't want to backtrack over ourselves. We can snake around and make sure that there's enough space to allot for the actual cording, but we do not want to backtrack over ourselves, as that cording can bulk up. So with cording, it's actually a very easy technique in that you're just stitching from one end to another, but you do have to make sure that your in and out points are on different ends. Now, what if our stitch in and out points are, in different areas? Let's right click on this design, and for instance, let's say our out point was over here for some reason. When I regenerate my stitches and I go to my stitch player, if we watch the stitches play, we will be able to see, and I'll slow it down right here. I'm going to go stitch by stitch. It's doing good. Okay, it's going to go travel, but then it's going to come back and double over. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that the out point is in an optimal place. So we'll left click to get out of the stitch player. We'll right click on the area, and when we right click on we'll right click on the line. When we right click on this line, we have an in and an out point. As I put my cursor over the in point or the out point, my cursor turns into a four-way cross. Once I get that four-way cross, I'll left click, hold, and drag, bring it to the opposite end, and regenerate my stitches. When I do that, it will recalculate the stitching. I'll right click off to the side. I will want to go back into my stitch player and check those stitches and make sure that they go from one end to another. Cording is an easy technique in that it is just a run stitch, and it's running from one end of the line to the other end of the line, making sure not to backtrack over itself. So in your settings, all you do need to change on a line is that you make sure that it is a single running stitch, and that is in your line object stitch properties, as well as moving the in and out points if necessary. And that is placing your cursor over an in point or an out point while the area is selected. And if you have if the out point or in point is in the incorrect area, you just put your cursor over that point, make sure it turns into a four-way arrow, and then left click, hold, and drag into that opposite area. So for cording, it is an easier technique. Taping is exactly the same idea as cording in the digitizing aspect, except that the machine is doing the movement for you. As you can see in this video, this design is only a running stitch design going from one end to another, in that it's not doubling over itself, and the actual machine has a little foot that moves the tape back and forth so that the stitches actually go on either side. Now the stitching, like I said, is only a running stitch. It's actually just a straight stitch, but the foot in the machine for the taping moves it back and forth to where the stitching actually doesn't lay on top like the cording, but the stitching lays on either side. So with the taping, it's much the same digitizing, in that it's just a straight running stitch going from one end to another.